Hi, Leah. A huge welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us here at Faith in Media's podcast. How are you today?
Yes, I am delightful. It is slightly raining, but I am very pleased to be with you this
And
rainy
we're
morning.
pleased to be with you. This is not our first kind of engagement. We were so privileged to have you at our lunchtime prayer not too long ago in August, although strangely enough, we're already in the new year. It's just wild that time has just gone by so quickly.
So fast.
And you shared so much encouragement with the rest of our community. So we just wanted to have an opportunity to extend what you were sharing with us that day. And so it really is such a pleasure to have you with us. Also, Happy New Year, 2024.
Happy New Year! I feel like
I
I'm
think
living in
it's
the future.
it's wild that I feel like time is just going by so quickly. I don't know if you feel that way.
Oh yeah.
I
Well,
feel like
also,
it just
the
it
older
just
you get,
speeds for us. Yeah.
the older you get, the faster it goes as well. So,
I'm not going to comment on that one. I'm not going to comment on that one at all. But before we think about kind of like a new kind of like phase of what this kind of means for you, a new year, a fresh start, tell us
mm,
a little bit about yourself. You call yourself Leah Sax. Tell us where this name originated and just a bit more about you.
yeah. So my name is Leah, and my work name is Leah Sax, because I am surprisingly a saxophonist, a sax player. Surprise! It started off as an Instagram handle, and then nobody knew my last name. Carla, you know my last name because you've known
I
me for a
do,
long,
I
long
do.
time.
I'm keeping it hush.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I play the saxophone. I've also got a podcast, a light podcast, but I basically travel the UK, the world, entertaining people. I work in the private events world. I work with bands and with DJs. I do a bit of backing vocals as well. And I work where anyone needs entertainment. I am there for sequin. This is low key, Leah. This is low key. If you need sequins and fabulousness, that's what I get hired for.
Is that
Uh,
high key Leah? High key
yeah,
Leah is glitter and glam.
Heike Leah has a pot of sequins that she now keeps for her niece and nephew to play with because she has so many sequin dresses they just molt everywhere. Um, yeah, and then I have a podcast, Delight Podcast, which is aimed at new believers, which is kind of a deep dive into one biblical topic with a guest each kind of episode. There, we've got a few episodes out, but that's it's a passion project I love doing with my good friend Adam.
It's so encouraging to hear other podcasters and someone like yourself. Yes, you occupy the space of music, but your passion for reaching
Mm,
people and making connection is so widely
mm,
spread. I think that's so
mm,
encouraging. And I know that many that come across this conversation, they'll feel like, well, actually, there's more than one way to actually kind of put myself and put what I feel I'm
mm.
called to do in different kind of platforms, which is encouraging to hear.
Yeah,
I think we're going to definitely dive a little bit more into particularly the work that you do, which is amazing, both as entertainer and also you use that space so intentionally for connection and to kind of
yeah,
bring joy there. And we'd love to
yeah.
talk some more about that in a minute. But I want to ask you, what are your feelings about things like New Year's resolutions? Are you for? Are you against them?
I I've been on a journey with this. My delightful sister, who is known perhaps to the Faith and Media crew and is how we first knew each other, Lani, is a
Yes.
huge New Year's resolutions person and processing the year. And I really admire how she does that because she intentionally takes time out to look at the past year, look at the future year. And
Mm,
that's not naturally the way that my brain processes. And I was like, why did she do that? But I have learned that God has created the year with seasons intentionally.
mm,
And that is a good opportunity to go, actually, this is a year. This is an
mm,
intentional part of God's organized plan to just to reflect and look at the past year and to look towards the future. I'm not someone who will intentionally set resolutions, but I will take time to reflect and process maybe what I'd like to grow in this year or
mm,
what I would like to change or where frequently because my busiest time of year can be the festive season. January's downtime. I take a time to go, oh, I've been working too much. Where is God in my life at the moment?
yeah.
Why am I too weary to open up a book or the Bible or a conversation with a friend? So for me, frequently the beginning of the time of the year is to stop, rest, and reflect. So
Mm,
yeah, that's what it kind of looks like in my life on the regular. So I think it was on the regular means I'm frequently too busy and I should really like take notes.
But I love what you shared there, because I think when we look kind of, historically about resolutions, people say, well, I break them in the first month of January or something, and they
Yeah,
don't really last long. But the idea of setting healthy goals and aspirations and
yeah,
reflective, like let's take some honest, candid, insight and look at where are these areas that what have we achieved this year, especially in our relationship with God? What have we decided, like we realize this is a trigger and this is clearly an area of development, and giving yourself that space and grace to go
mm,
there, and you're not alone in doing it. And I love how you describe that, because
mm,
already that involvement isn't something solo that I have to do in my own strength. The way that you described it is like, God, let's just stop life, which can be so distracting, and just take stock of everything. Have you
yeah.
experienced many kind of moments where you felt like this is definitely like a new beginning that was quite defining? It could be musically, could be personally, anything like that.
Interesting. I'm kind of someone who will only ever notice these things in hindsight. So I'll kind of bumble along and go like, oh, like I remember, a conversation with a brother who's also a musician at Phil Short 10 years ago, and just defining like how my career should go, and just hearing his wisdom and speaking into that and going, and that overnight changed my work life and how God chose to grow my work in that period. It was definitely triggered by this conversation with a brother late in my car on the way back from church one night. And I just remember that being very, yeah, very different. My father passed away in 2022 in March, and that was a big transition. It was a big, it was a big affirmation of faith with heartbrokenness.
It's such an
So
interesting oxymoron almost. Tell us a little bit about how that was for you.
So my family are very close, and I don't take that for granted. Our family unit, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother-in-law, and their lovely kids, which you know very well, Carla. And we are close, and praise God, we are all believers, and we love each other. And uh, a beautiful thing that I learned at his Thanksgiving service is that well, not learned, but recognized, is that he told my sister and I that he loved us every day, and that defined us as women very much so. And that became because he was love first. So he's with Jesus, but we miss him so much and we are so sad. But I have never felt the power of prayer and the character of God as our rock and our redeemer, and the truth of that phrase, we mourn with those who mourn. That same brother, weirdly, who I had, not weirdly, in God's provision, that I had that work conversation with, I remember him coming towards me in church that first week back, and just enveloping me and weeping with me.
Wow.
And it was so powerful because he literally just came, and like, I love the fact that the word envelope is the word envelope as well, because you're literally
Yeah.
so I was enveloped by a brother who just wept, and I wept, and there was something beautiful in that, and that God is real and church family is so necessary. And those truths on heaven have never been more real.
Mm.
That resurrected hope has never been more real than that time, and that's continued to grow. And singing songs when we speak of future hope is still very, very real in a way that perhaps it wasn't before.
That's amazing. And I love how you describe these are almost bittersweet moments where you have this huge new wave of enlightenment, of revelation, of, like you say, when the truth that we
Yeah.
know of the word becomes so real in our reality, but also what it cost us to actually kind of progress in that moment. Have you felt
Mm.
that much has changed since the passing of Daddy? I know, like, he was sounds like he was an incredible man. I did have the privilege to meet him as well many times. But
Yeah.
what has that been like for you, this new wave of new Leah, subsequent to this really amazing person that has contributed so much to the awesomeness of what is you?
Oh, bless you. Um, has much changed? Everything and nothing. I think that's the fair way of doing it. The world keeps spinning. God is still faithful. So, in many ways, there are so many daily triggers because my father was in events. He was also very interested in my career, whether I'd be getting on an airplane and we discussed which airport I was going to, or whether I just wanted a hug because I was tired and overwhelmed. I miss those things, but the world keeps going. And
Mm.
the Lord provides stability. So everything and nothing has changed in this new season.
Yeah.
And I can't believe how time has passed so quickly. You know, you look back and, you know, in March it will be 2 years and you're just like, how? And there are days when sometimes don't think about it. And then there are days where I was literally excuse me, I was literally on my way home from my gig last night, and I was just got so sad because I wanted to discuss with him which hotels I was playing at and which route I was taking into town, and I was like, I just want to tell my daddy. So yeah, that's kind of an answer and a non-answer.
No, I think that's really helpful, and obviously yours is bereavement, but any others that go through very defining changes where things are just not the same anymore. It's that literally,
Mm,
like you've described, life does still go on. There is still grace to be had. There's still hope
mm.
because it does continue, but it doesn't mean that we don't forget really from all of
Yes.
those
Oh
things.
no.
Just don't forget.
Every
Uh,
no.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your music. You are a musician. Is it just the saxophone, or how many instruments do you play, and where did this love of music come from?
Thank you for asking that question. So, my father, who a key instrument in our life, ha ha ha, was like, right, girls, you and Lani are going to learn the piano. So I was like piano when I was 5. And when we were about 10, he was like, right, girls, he was very sensible, very long planning. It's time for you to pick a second instrument. My sister, for reasons unbeknownst to me, had always wanted to play the flute. So she went off with the flute. And my father was like, Leah, I think you should do the saxophone. I was like, okay, daddy. And then it became my personality. Or
All you
no,
need
I
is
think my
you for like things to start growing from your organs, and then it will make sense that
yeah,
you literally embody the sax.
yeah, exactly it. And I think he just was a wise man who saw the character of his daughter and was like, "That's an expressive girl. We're going to give her something loud and shiny."
I love that.
And so yeah, and then I self-taught kind of clarinet and flute because they're very similar. In this industry, if you kind of play one, you're a doubler. So that started young, and then I just realised in my early 20s, I did a degree in music and a master's, and I realized that I couldn't not play music. Like, it made me sad if I wasn't making music. So I was like, oh, it's connected to my emotions. And so plugging away, that's how I kind of got into music. And I do singing as well, but on gigs it would be backing vocals. At church, it's more like leading congregational worship. Yeah.
I love that. Gosh, and it's amazing to hear. Like, normally when someone is very proficient in one, they find themselves, like you say, let's just make sure we've got everything else in that same kind of remit. It just becomes really easy. I envy that. I've only recently started teaching myself the guitar, and I can only play 4 chords. But it is just
That's all
wonderful
you
to
need.
just play music. Right. It's wonderful to be able to, the independence that it gives you, I think, of expression. There is just
Yeah,
something
that's
really
exactly it.
unique about that, isn't there? And it sounds like you live in that incredible space. Is there, you mentioned there's a connection between your emotions. It's a really big part of expressing you when we talk about
Mm.
music and what it means to you. Is there a connection between music and your faith in any way?
Yes, 100%. Which is really interesting theologically, actually, especially in the role of music and worship in a church context, music and sung worship. Um, Worship, when we are sung congregationally, is about the word as well, isn't it? So, like, the
Mm-hmm.
priority is the truth that we are singing to God, to one another. That is at what the work through the Spirit. But God also did give us psalms. He gave us a whole. He knew that singing it is a physically different emotion. So that's one part of that. And therefore, for me, music and worship therefore has two additional parts, which is when I work in the secular world, and I put that in inverted fingers because I'm still worshipping in the secular world. And then there's the me playing sax, say, in a church context, which is worshipful as well. So
Yeah.
in a church context, there is something very, I head and heart, I'm worshipping God in that playing because I am expressing how I feel. Lyrically, I'm following the words. So for me, I am praying that to God be the glory, and I'm playing that in my phrasing and in the notes that I choose. But also in my secular work, I am still aware that I am doing everything for the glory of God. We are called to do everything that we do for the glory of God. That's not to say that's a mental process intentionally all the time, but it is a heart I endeavour to seek. I have some certain trigger songs, some pop songs that are great worship songs if you just figure out, like, You Got the Love, great.
I think the
We
original
bought,
actually was not the one by
yeah.
Florence.
Well,
The original, I think, actually was a worship song.
really, I thought, oh, that's mad. I
Yeah,
thought she was the one that wrote that. My bad. And there's another one which is we found love in a hopeless place. We found love. That's
yeah,
the
interesting.
Rihanna. I'm like, oh my goodness, Jesus brought this love to this hopeless place. So there are certain trigger songs that I'm like, Leah, get back into where you are, heart. And there are certain times when those songs come on, when I see videos, and I'm literally like, hands in the air, being like, this is what this. I know it's silly, but for me, that's an important part of remembering, readjusting. Yes, I'm sparkly sequin, eyeliner, heel, saxophone. No, daughter of Christ. So like that's how I do that.
I find it so refreshing to hear you speak about that because I'm not sure that I think collectively everybody sees it that way, if that makes sense, in terms of church environment, church culture, and just kind of the narratives we have about that. But I think,
Mm,
like you say, at the end of the day, I'm still his creation, regardless of where I am. I'm still his daughter. My identity hasn't altered because of a geographical space or even a platform. And I love that you're like, yes, I'm an entertainer and I can sing things, but when they come through my mouth or when I'm facilitating them, I know from whence I'm giving the glory and recognition to. And I think that's such a true thing. And I think particularly in music or in entertainment, I think sometimes we feel like, can we do that? And it sounds like you actually do that so well. And I think that's incredibly encouraging. How would you kind of encourage others who feel kind of a little bit in turmoil about that?
it's interesting because it's subjective lines as well. So
Mm,
number one, identity of who you are is first, and that,
yes.
and we are not ashamed of the gospel, which I know takes a lot of courage, but that's the perspective in which we come into. We are created sons and daughters, loved, chosen, predestined every day of the week, not just Sunday. Um, but I think if you're in turmoil, that can also be the Holy Spirit on your conscience. Like, for example,
Mm,
I, as a performer, have know which settings I'm willing to perform in. There's only one or two songs I really won't ever want to perform. Um, and yes, some of the lyrics are not edifying, hands
mm,
down. There's so much sex, there's so much, not so much violence, but mostly highly sexualized. But then
yeah.
it's like, well, I'm in that space. I can't be in that space and not do them. Realistically, I'm in the pop world. How
Mm,
do I choose to go into that? Where are your boundaries? So I just think it's okay if you're not willing to do something. It's
yeah.
helpful to process those eventualities. So when
Mm,
it does happen and you're like, this is what I'm going to do in this scenario, this is how I'm
yeah.
going to prevent me being in this scenario. But I think of all the people of the world, we sell in the gospel, so we can be the biggest risk takers because what's the worst that can happen? Jesus.
True. 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 I wanted to talk as well in terms of, and you've already kind of alluded to it in your last comments there, but what is it like occupying the music industry full time? Is it like a lot of us who have had the privilege of looking at your Instagram, like you said, there's a public face, an advertising face for what
Mm,
you do, and we see all the
mm,
highlight reels, which is very typical, isn't it? In any kind of
mm.
social media or kind of promotion.
Yeah.
What is that really like for you? Is it as fun and all glitz and glamour the entire time? What are
I
the
mean, clearly
yeah.
not. I mean, as a creative caveat, I work in the entertainment industry as opposed to the arts industry. So that's
Mhm.
just one side of it. Um, there's lots of waiting around and driving in the rain. There's some gigs where you're like, what's the point of me playing? Why am I doing this?
Mm,
No, and those are the ones also really where you have to pray the hardest. You're like, Leah, get a grip. You are still, because you've got to do a good job, all circumstances, no matter where you are, what they're paying you, what the punters are like, and how bad the music system is. You still do your best job, and then you have to be like, Leah, get a grip. You grace, peace, mercy, love. Go into that space. Um, I'm not gonna lie, God did make me glass half full. So like I will just see the sunbeam in the situation. It's a programming thing. Cannot take credit for it. Um, but yeah, it's tiring and it can be quite lonely.
mm,
Um, I'm quite intentional on getting. So my church service is in Central London at 6 p.m. I said CCM because that's my name. My church, Christ Church Mayfair, is at 6 p.m. If I can make half of church, a quarter of church, an eighth of church, I will be there. So I've learned that being in fellowship is absolutely vital.
mm,
Do not stop meeting together. There's a reason God told us that is because we need it for our faith. Um, And so I've learnt to do that. I did that last Sunday. I was in a promo recording session. I came halfway through the sermon, but it was precious to be in that space. Family, as we've discussed, is important. I make sure to plug into that. But like, because I like to think of the rest of the world working antisocial hours. Alas, I think the rest of the world think I work antisocial hours. You know, I'm busy almost every evening. Seeing with friends can be hard. You have to, you know,
Yeah.
you have to be super intentional. Like my one day of the week is like, is anyone free on a Monday at 6 or like a Tuesday at 11 in the morning? So yeah, that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
it, for me personally, outweigh the positives? Not really. Do I feel called to be in that space still 100%?
I think that really is what distinguishes the difference, because despite, like you said, those are definite challenges, those are definite grind moments, but they still make you feel invigorated. You still feel so purposeful with it from the sounds of how you describe, which is really, really encouraging. And I think if we were to follow kind of that approach, it's a really good almost litmus test. Like, what is happening in this? Am I in it's helping to kind of really fine tune, am I or am I not in the right place? Would you say there's any kind of like, I don't know, spiritual figures in present life or biblical figures that have kind of inspired like parts of your musical journey, or your influences in terms of how you approach music?
Interesting. So I think my father was a great, and my mother actually, parents, great spiritual role models. My father was just who he was in all circumstances, and I think that was passed down. And you know, we. Oh, I say this because it can be very complicated. We're brought up to have a confidence in ourselves. So you know, my sister, obviously, Lani. But I think that's a piece with who we are as believers in the public sphere. So that's been very encouraging that we just, you know, seeing that when, you know, in it, because he worked quite publicly in politics and in events, just seeing that he was a believer and spoke very publicly in all circumstances. My mother is full of grace and love. I live with my mother and it's wonderful. Every morning I come down, she's got her Bible open. You know, our grandparents, especially on our German side, my mother is German, were the greatest believers. So we've just got a family of encouragement. I love the Proverbs 31 woman because she is smashing life, and she also has
Literally.
really cool, expensive clothing. And she's a businesswoman. So every now and again, I'm
Yes,
like, shall I?
yes, yes.
But she's like,
People,
I royal
it's,
purple.
it's so interesting because many times there is this conversation about, how appropriate is biblical kind of like narrative helpful to encouraging a modern woman. But the Proverbs 31, she's in business, she is domestic goddess as well. She's also really great at delegating. She doesn't have to do everything herself. There's so much in that, and like, and in whichever field or kind of space or season you find yourself in, there is such an affirmation there. So I love that you brought that in. That's a great example. And you
She's
mentioned that
such a
you've had
boss.
quite a lot of public kind of performances, and it's clear that your heritage in family and that kind of spiritual wealth inheritance that you have from them is really kind of equipped you for, it must be quite intimidating or quite challenging to do what you do day in and day out. And like you say, it's not social hours. It doesn't always like allow for certain freedoms that the rest of us might take for granted in our 9 to 5 kind of scope, whatever. But when you've been playing for key figures, like we know you've played for prime ministers, etc., how has that kind of helped in your performances? Do you see yourself, I'm just an entertainer in that kind of space, or is it, do you bring, like you say, this amazing inheritance you have from family and the kind of boldness of faith with you into those spaces and performances as well?
Yeah, yeah. I think it doesn't matter who the audience is. They're all created in the image of God. If they're a prime minister or an ambassador, a pop star, or, you know, Sarah from down the street, they're all the same in my mind. It doesn't mean that you respect, we're called to respect and love everyone, right?
Yes.
So for me, there's no difference whether it's a big, shiny international stage or whether it's a pub down the street. And I try and honor every situation. Obviously, I say obviously, but God acts through word as well. Like we live our lives as an image of what we do, but it's those conversations frequently for me with the security guard, with the who I have great chats with security guards, with the barman, with the events manager, with the client. That's also where you frequently speak of the love and demonstrate the love that Jesus has for us in our conversation. I mean, you've got to be chatting to someone to get an actual Bible conversation, but with fellow musicians, that happens fairly frequently. But so to answer your question, which I'm not sure if I have done awfully well, is that all audiences are the same because they're just people. And you love and respect everyone you meet.
I love that. And I think that's such an important thing to carry. And I think this kind of alludes back to what you mentioned earlier about having that security in your identity first and foremost as I'm a daughter of Christ. I'm a child of God. And therefore, actually, that's probably trumps everything else, whether you're in, very influential, powerful spaces or in everyday spaces that may be a little bit more low key. It's still the same. It really is still the same.
It is people.
And it sounds that you're just so motivated in a wonderful way about connecting. And you've given us a demonstration just there in the last thing that you mentioned about whether I'm chatting to a security guard, whether I'm performing, whether I'm speaking to somebody else that's facilitating in the moment of all that is my life and job. It sounds very much like it makes sense for the natural progression that you've got a podcast like Delight Podcast. Tell us a little bit about kind of what led you there and all of that sort of thing.
So interestingly, my first love was always radio. And then I realised I couldn't do the music. So back in the day, if you'd asked 15-year-old Leah what she wanted to do, she wanted to be a radio presenter. Hello and welcome to BBC.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that.
And so I love it. And so my lovely, lovely friend Adam Curtis, we've been doing a Cypher Adventure Bible holiday camp for 15-odd-ish years together as part of his curacy, because he's a Anglican, had to do some form of project for new Christians. And I kind of jokingly said, don't you dare do a podcast without me, because we're both creative types, but both quite different. And so I invited him myself onto his curacy project. And that was a podcast aimed at new believers, because there wasn't really anything on the market for it. On the market, you know what I mean? Makes me sound like I'm selling, I don't know, potatoes. Anyway, and so we started this little season of Adam and I hosting and having a guest every week, kind of taking a deep dive into one biblical concept, assuming no prior deep knowledge. And we kind of phrased it as camp talks for adults. So there's talks you get on kids' camps, but they're kind of for adults, super accessible, super fun. And in God's goodness, he has grown that. So Delight Podcast has about 18, 19, 20 episodes as of right now. Upcoming spring, we'll be releasing season 5. And God has provided us with a faithful and growing audience. By necessity, believers have to listen to it before a non-believer can, in the sense that it will frequently be a believer who will share the podcast. But it's been we started it in lockdown. It's been a real encouragement, because I edit it quite obsessively. And obsessively is the wrong word. I just have a musician's ear for it. So I'm like, you spend hours editing, seeking wisdom in these guests of like spiritual battles, or what does God think of our work? Or, I mean, I'm not a parent, but like, what does God think about parenting? There was such wisdom. Or like, what does Bible say on meditation? Or like, what sanctification? And so it's been a blessing to me in many ways as well.
And do you find kind of the feedback sometimes of what you get as a result of the podcast? Have you received any kind of, people have been really moved by it, they're really touched by what it is that you're sharing? Tell us a little bit about how that's kind of impacting people.
Oh, wow. Well, we're always humble, because as far as we're concerned, it's just me and Adam having a laugh with a guest, and then we're putting it out there. And then we were like, people are listening to it and interacting with it. We're like, oh. So we've had some lovely ones of people just saying, they used a series of our first season, or whichever season was, as a basis for Bible studies, as a different way into Bible studies. We have another church using it as a way to get their youth thinking on a topic. We're like, right, let's listen to this podcast, and then let's just talk about it afterwards, because podcasts are quite contemporary. We've had lovely people going, it's just so fun to hear believers enjoying the Bible, who, especially for British podcasts as well, just being like, this is awesome. Or we've had people going, I'm not a believer, but I'm listening to every episode.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And you're just like, oh my goodness.
That is incredible.
How has God put... Yeah, exactly. Or like, I came across this episode and I was like, oh, I pointed back to this one. So I've got lots of stories like that. And, our guests in God's provision are wise people. And you're like, oh, and, so, and And I'm passionate about it because I believe in it. And I think the content is good and helpful and beautiful. And also, we spend the beginning of each episode looking at the testimony of our guest. And like, testimonies are great encouragement, right? You're like, how did Jesus save you? Well, we know how, but like, what's your story of salvation? And like, what's God been at work with? And you're like, yes, this is exciting. So yeah.
It sounds so like invigorating, and it's fueling the kind of sustainability of what you're doing, and such purpose there. I think that blew me away just hearing what you said, that people that are not believers are finding themselves drawn to listen to these conversations. And surely is
Yep.
that not the Great Commission? Go into the world and share.
Yes.
And what a wonderful opportunity. And I think many times, and I'm not sure how you feel about it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is we've got so much progression with technology, we've got AI, we've got podcasts, we have social media. And a lot of the time we get kind of a bit into the fear space, if I'm very honest, about like, how effective is it? And we just see a lot of the negative kind of output of that, or outcomes of it. But really, when you hear stories about how this amazing tool is being used in this way, do you hold any reservations, or how does it make you feel? Because you occupy these new spaces, you occupy these on-trend, relevant spaces, but sometimes do you feel there's a reservation towards kind of like that space as well?
It's interesting. Whenever I feel that, we just pray.
Great answer.
Which I know sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how quickly you forget to pray about something. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much content, isn't there? It's very public. Like we are in our little space, podcast space, deeply biblical. Like, you know, and I know that, you know, and I share it publicly on my platforms and doing it. And there can be a fear, number one, of being very public with faith, which we are. I realized in our kind of episode 0, Adam and I both shared our testimonies. And I was like, oh, this is the first time I think I've gone very publicly, this is who I am, in that very literal, this is my story of faith. I think as a human being, you get lost in numbers and goals and listens and percentages. And that can be good to acknowledge, and is a good, wise business choice to be intentional with that. But I think if you're prayerful about things and you seek to glorify God, that's all you can do.
I love that. Simple, but so like, that's it, bullseye. I love it so much. And you've spoken so, you know, comfortably, and it's really refreshing to hear someone speak about, this is who I am, and there's so much joy in the way that it's like oozing from your pores, and how you carry that with you. There's not a shift or a change in who you are. You bring the same authenticity, the same. This girl is doused in faith. This girl is doused in Jesus. And I bring her everywhere. And there will be plenty of other young musicians that are part of our network. Please share just a piece of advice. How can they be encouraged to navigate this space as up and comers trying to navigate this world, and not really sure how to do that well, how to do that also as a Christian within the media or within the music space?
Oh, that's such a great question, Carla.
That's
such a great question. Seek Jesus first, because that's the only thing that really matters, and everything else will fall into place. You can't escape his sovereign plan. But some practical ways of living that out is be plugged into church. I would say seek some older mentors. Like, give me a call. Not that I don't know, that what a mentor makes me sound like I have wisdom, but all of a sudden I found people calling me up asking for advice.
Your
I was like,
experience
okay,
qualifies you. So I would say absolutely you are a great candidate for as a mentor.
Yeah, find mentors and ask questions. I think as a younger person, I'm not somebody who personally regrets things as a kind of, I try not to as a thing, because I just think you don't want to take away from God's path of your life. Anyway, that's different. That's a whole different matter, because you can talk about sin. Let's stop that. But ask questions of people, because I think sometimes we don't ask questions because we feel silly asking things like, but how do I do this? And what should I do about this? So seek someone new advice and ask them, because that's the only way you learn, you know. Dive into the deep end. You can take risks. You can do the thing that seems huge. And if you fail, that's not a failure. I think our earthly world has failure is like, if you didn't get 10 out of 10, or you got 0 out of 10. But the whole process of it is a learning, and that is a beautiful thing. Just because it didn't have the outcome you expected doesn't mean it's not a failure. So mentors, stay in church family, put yourself out there.
I love that. And what's next for Leah before we kind of draw this amazing conversation to a close? What is next for Leah?
Do you know what? She's going to keep going what she does, doing what she does. There's nothing huge. She had a gig last night. She got in at 2. She's now in the 3rd person. Who even knew? She's got a gig tonight. She's got a gig tomorrow night. She should pop to Boots this afternoon because she needs to do some like life admin. That's the immediate Leah. I don't know. It's really interesting praying about the future. I'm in an industry that perhaps might age me out. So you're just like, what is a helpful goal? What's long term? What's all these things? The podcast is due to come out in Spring Delight podcast, which I'm excited about. And I'm hoping to see my family and give my nephew a piano lesson at the weekend. So that is long term, and popping to Boots and seeing my nephew and niece is my short term goal.
Leah, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. I think the best way to describe it is so much light in what you shared, in your story. There's just so much. I think colour is a good way to describe it. You glorify God in all the things, in the sad bits, in the low bits, in the high bits, in the bits that even maybe not even seem so certain. And it's just been so edifying to hear that. And I know if I have been encouraged, I have absolute confidence that anyone else that comes across this conversation will. If you'd like to find out more about Leah, please make sure that you follow her on our website, leahsax.com, and also follow her handle at Leah Sax, I think, on all of her social media platforms, and follow her Delight podcast. You will be continuously encouraged. Leah, a huge thank you for being with us here at Faith in Media. God bless you, and we love you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.